Hey everybody, it's Safi and Marco. Dish Out on Movies, the only movie review show on YouTube to review movies in terms of food. It's just Marco here once again, and I am here today to review Terrifier 3. For starters, I should give a little history about my opinion on the series. I hated the first one. I thought the first one is probably one of the worst horror movies that I've ever seen. It was not thrilling or terrifying to me at all. There was only one part that I liked, and it was the part where Art the Clown chops the woman in half, or he saws her in half, I think. I can't remember. I only watched it once, and I'll never watch it again. But it was overly simplistic. It barely had a plot. It wasn't scary. The Art the Clown character was not very interesting because he doesn't talk. And because he doesn't talk, you have all these other characters who are able to talk, and they're not interesting at all. They're the most boring, one-dimensional characters that you've ever seen. They're not even interesting like the characters from 80s slashers where, those characters would have a little tiny thing or two about them that's interesting. Let's think about, Friday the 13th 3, for instance, you had the bikers, and they were bikers, and you had the fat guy who was like a prankster, and he was upset that he couldn't get any girls, and you had the girl who looks like Audrey Hepburn, and she could have been in love with him if he wasn't a prankster, and you had the final girl, and she was a final girl, and but they were a little bit actually. Okay, maybe I'm using the wrong series as an example, but typically the characters were a lot more interesting. They had a little tiny thing about them that was interesting, and then the second Terrifier I thought was actually a bit of an improvement. It was kind of like a mixed bag, because on one hand, it actually had a plot, which was kind of like ripping off elements from Halloween 4. It took strong influence from Halloween 4, movies like that. But on the other hand, it was way too long. It was like 5 hours long. There's a certain point in the movie where you're like, okay, is the movie almost over? And then you look at the screen, and you still had an hour left, and that was what the second movie was like. However, the second movie did have quite a few things that I liked. It had some really cool nightmare sequences that made me feel like, okay, now this is interesting, because maybe this character is a little bit like Freddy Krueger, and he can enter your dreams, and that would be kind of like a cool element to play with. But then I would also say that a lot of the second movie felt like the person who made it was just showing off. It felt like he was just showing off, like he can do all these special effects really easily, and he on a lower budget than, these big studio movies, and he can do this and he can do that. A lot of people misconstrued it for thinking that he's like an actual sadist in real life, because he makes these special effects and he's showing them off. And I would say I don't really think so. I've gotten the same type of reaction before. There's been a couple of really funny instances where people have read my scripts and they just get so offended and upset. And it's it's a fucking movie, you fucking loser. There was this one bitch, and she just would not do anything. She just she would read a script, and then she'd be like, no, I don't want to do that. And then she'd read another one, be like, no, I don't want to do that. And there was this one that I wrote. It was a Valentine's Day themed movie, and it's actually, I would say, it was really good, despite its flaws. And she said that she couldn't finish the script because it was an evil script, and that I was an evil person for having written it, And it's like, what the fuck? I mean, you just can't make this shit up nowadays. So, I know that he's probably not a horrible person in real life. He just likes to show off a lot. He likes to show off what he can do with these special effects. And that's kind of, I was looking forward to Terrifier 3 simply because I wanted to see if he would improve a little bit more. And I would say, honestly, it's again kind of like a mixed bag, to where I think that there are some things that this movie does better than the second one. But then I also think there's things that this movie does worse than the second one. And I would say that overall, my review of the third Terrifier, and actually I would also like to add, I did like Art the Clown a lot more in the sequel. I mean, I kind of got over how he doesn't talk. It's just that in the first one, there was no one else interesting. So it was really hard to find something to enjoy. I mean, you have to admit, if you put Freddy Krueger in the first movie, he would have made it a lot more interesting because he would have talked the whole movie. And he would have been like, Freddy Krueger, I'm gonna chop you in half, saw you in half, dumb bitch. That's what he would do. But in the third movie, it's funny because it started off, it had a really good opening scene. I had a smile on my face the whole time. I was kind of laughing along because I was having such a good time with the opening scene. It actually, the opening scene felt like a real horror movie. It actually had a little bit of an element of, I don't know how you describe, I was a little bit uncomfortable. I was a little bit on edge and kind of, it had an unsettling feeling, I'll say that. The opening scene was probably my favorite scene of the movie, if not my second favorite scene. And from then on, I felt like the movie went downhill. Because I would say that it doesn't really feel like it needed to be made. It feels like an encore to the second movie. It feels like, in terms of logic, in terms of telling a story, the second one told a complete story. It was kind of goofy and silly and dumb in some cases, but it did tell a mostly complete story. This one, however, felt like it was just an encore where, okay, now it's him at Christmas, killing some people off, characters from the last movie come back, stuff happens, the end. It didn't really feel like there was an actual story there. And I would say that that's this director, filmmakers, I would say that that's his number one issue as a filmmaker, is his inability to tell a good story. He needs someone else to tell the story where he can insert little fun things here and there. He does do a lot of little good touches throughout the movie of little parts that are just little tiny pieces of crumbles of a great movie. But the rest of it is it's just a complete I don't know. But one thing that I'll say is that after having seen Joker 2, this movie was like a godsend, because it's this movie gave us what Joker 2 was supposed to give. And I think that that's something to say, is that it's really telling that you have Joker 2, which was a movie that told all the fans that they were horrible people for liking the first movie. It humiliated the fans. It didn't give the fans what they wanted. And then on the other hand, you have this little indie movie, Terrifier 3, and they gave the fans exactly what they wanted. I can guarantee that if you like the second movie, you'll probably like this one too. If you like it better or worse, that's up for debate. And, it at least feels like the filmmaker, he wanted to give the fans what they wanted. He wanted to make a good Terrifier movie, and he delivered. And so what are you going to get now? Well, everyone is going to like Terrifier 3, and everyone is going to say, fuck you to Joker 2. And so I think that this is a prime example and a lesson of why Hollywood is failing. Because they're making these awful movies that have all these stupid political agendas, and they're all made for the modern audiences who don't actually exist. And then you have these indie movies like Terrifier 3, and they give the fans what they want. And therefore, you have a good movie. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as like making a good movie that the audiences will want. And, yeah. Now, I want to get more into the plot, or I guess the quote-unquote plot. It really feels like the guy who made this movie, he doesn't really have anything to say. Like, he said everything that he wanted to say in the second one. It doesn't feel like he actually had anything else to add to his critiques, his commentary on the slasher genre, because you see all of the elements that you already saw in the second one. There's this kind of mean-spirited, like, demonization of people who are interested in true crime, which they had in the second one. They had that again in this one to a much lesser impactful way, where there's like a true crime podcast that these characters do, and it really didn't come off like it was very, very well written. And then, speaking of the characters from the last movie, or did I mention them? One of the biggest issues I have with this movie was how the final girl, I can't even remember her name. Is it Sienna? Yeah. She kind of, I gotta be honest, the actress who plays Sienna, I think that she would be a good Catwoman. I just saying, she has the look. She has the Catwoman look, but I don't think Hollywood's going to hire her because they're mad that movies like Terrifier 3 are being made because they're not appealing to the modern audiences. The types of people who, well, never mind. But anyways, what was I going to say? Oh, yeah, okay, well, they take her, and this movie takes place 5 years after Terrifier 2 for some reason. I don't know why 5 years particularly. It's just a random number that he came up with. He probably just, like, rolled a dice, and then it landed on 5, and he was like, okay, 5 years later, that's when this movie takes place. And they just put her with this new family so that she can just kind of go through exactly what happened in the last movie, basically. Like, there's nothing really new that happens in this movie in terms of, like, you get all the same dynamics that you got in the second movie, but to a lesser degree. I can't even remember the characters, like, how they're related to her. Like, there's the guy and the woman, and then their daughter, and she reads the final girl's diary, and she's really interested in her, but there's not really anything interesting going on with these characters. It's essentially, it feels like a Hallmark movie. It feels like a weird Hallmark movie that's going on while there's this Terrifier movie going on in the background for most of the whole movie. And the brother, that was the worst part of this movie. What they did to the brother character, after he survived the second movie, what they do to his character is that they just turn him into a complete, like, nothing. And he's in college, but he still acts and talks like an elementary schooler, so it feels like an elementary schooler cosplaying as a college student. And he has the roommate whose girlfriend is the true crime podcast person. It's basically like the same thing as last movie, where you have these side characters who are going to get killed off, and then you have the final girl character, and you know that she's going to survive. It's basically like the same exact thing from last movie. There's not really much innovation that happens in this. And the way that Art the Clown comes back too was kind of bizarre. He had to... I can't even remember. It was some weird explanation that they just casually talk about and then they drop it. And they don't explore it anymore. Like, this movie was missing the level of detail and story that the second movie had, to where, like, you got all that explanation about the father going crazy and drawing these pictures and everything and predicting what was going to happen. And there was just so much more there in the second movie that wasn't there in this movie. And they did make this movie really fast. They made it as soon as the second one got put in theaters, right? Like, they made it really, really fast, and it shows. So this is like the slasher movie that they made too fast, and so it's kind of lesser in quality in terms of story. I would also like to say that one of the things that I liked about the movie was the fact that it was shorter. It had a pretty good pace. It had a pretty good pace to where it felt like it's not going on for way too long like the second movie, and it's just at the right length. That was one of the things that I really appreciated about the movie. I would also say there was a really good scene. There's this really interesting dynamic to where Art the Clown, for some reason, he's really interested in Santa Claus. He's really interested in, like, the idea of Santa, but his version of being Santa is causing evil and causing chaos. And see, this is sad because I felt like that was such a good idea. That was such a great, like, little idea that he had of, like, there's this part where he actually meets Santa Claus, and that's probably the second best scene in the movie. It was this whole sequence, and it felt like, wow, like, this is what the whole movie should have been. It should have been, like, exploring this story of, like, Art the Clown is, like, an evil version of Santa, and he wants to spread fear and violence instead of joy and love or whatever, like Santa Claus does. That could have been a really interesting story to tell, but it wasn't really told in this movie. And then I will say, like, the second half is where the movie really falls apart. Like, the first half is probably the part that I thought was the best out of both parts, I would say. I don't know. I just said that wrong. I shouldn't have said it like that. But you know what I mean. It felt like in the second half, like, they were really just kind of going back to familiar territory. I will say they also added some nudity, which was the only element. This was one of the things that I really despised about the second movie, was that movie was trying to be like an 80s slasher, but it didn't have any nudity at all. And it's like, well, that's not an 80s slasher at all. So I was thankful that this movie had a little bit of that, and it had a great kills too. I will say that this movie also had some really good kills. I love the kills. But the second one, I think, had better kills. But yeah, in general, I thought this movie was okay. It's just that it was a mixed bag, and so you had these little parts of it that were really good, and then these parts that were really bad. And it's almost like, this is my food review for the movie. It's like Art the Clown has given you a bag of candy, and you reach your hand inside. You get maybe a couple of little pieces of candy, like you get a Reese's cup, which is the opening scene. You get a Snickers bar, which is like the part where he meets Santa Claus. But then you get razor blades and you get maggots and shit, and those are the parts of the movie that I didn't like. And it's like, well, this is an Art the Clown candy bag, so, you know, what did you expect that you were going to get, you know? So I would say that, like, going forward, I hope that in the fourth one, he gets someone else to, like, help tell an actual story. Because it ended in a way to where you could definitely tell they wanted to make another one. It didn't end like the second one where it felt like, okay, the story's over, what's going to happen next? It felt like, no, they want to do another one. It's meant to go on at the end of this movie. So, yeah. I wasn't expecting to give Terrifier 3 an okay review. And in fact, I would say at this point, it's around the top 10 of the year. It filled a hole in the month of October. You know, there's no horror movies coming out this month, basically. All the horror movies, for some reason, they already all came out in September. I don't know why that is. I think it's because I think it might have started when It Chapter 1 did really good in September in 2017. They must have thought after that, ooh, you know what? Maybe we should just release all the horror movies in September or whatever. But yeah, so I would recommend this movie. I would say to go see it, although I would say with a caveat, it is just like the second one. But it's shorter. The characters are a little bit less interesting. They kind of try to do this thing where it's like showing the aftermath of surviving a slasher movie, but it just kind of feels like we've been there, done that. And, yeah. But anyways, I don't think I have anything else to say. I think I've said all that there is to say about Terrifier 3. So please like this video and comment and tell me what you thought of Terrifier 3. Do you think that it was better than the second one? It's definitely better than the first one, because the first one was a pile of garbage. And then please subscribe to our channel if you'd like to see more honest movie reviews. Goodbye, everybody. See you soon.